Speaker, the Labor Party will be supporting the Land Transport, Road Safety and Other Matters Amendment Bill this afternoon. There are many areas in the bill which we find agreement, and I want to touch on some of those, and I also want to mention some of the areas where we do not believe the bill goes far enough. I was fascinated just on a procedural point, sir, that the Minister, when he began his speech, moved yet again another truncated referral motion to the Select Committee to not only change the Select Committee process but to allow the Select Committee to meet while at the same time the House is meeting. And once again, no explanation given by a Minister as to why that has happened. That is happening far too often, and we will not support... Sorry? The Minister says to get the legislation in place. He wasn't good enough to tell the House that, and in fact if he had spoken to the opposition, he may have found some support for that, given that some of these measures could take place this summer if they're being properly shepherded through. But time and time again, bills are coming through like this, and indeed recently we had the Arts Council bill, which we were asked to believe needed a truncated Select Committee process. There is an arrogance that comes through that, sir, and I think that's a regrettable thing. So this ought to have been a bill which the Minister could build enormous political support for, because of some of the measures that are in here which do enjoy support across the House. But unfortunately, like so many of the things that Stephen Joyce does, he gets the optics right, he gets all the marketing and the buzzwords and the presentation and the media releases right, but he doesn't get the actual grunt and the substance right at all. And there is no better example, sir, than his failure of leadership in this bill to reduce the blood alcohol limit for adults from 0.08 to 0.05. He has not been able to get that through in this bill at all, despite the overwhelming evidence that exists, the 300 studies over 50 years that exists that says that the adult alcohol limit is just too high. And the Minister knows that. Everyone knows the Minister thinks that personally. Everyone watches him answering questions in the House week on week with this, looking increasingly uncomfortable about the fact that he knows that his policy position is completely wrong on it. And he said this bill brings into effect safer journeys. That's true. And if you go to the Safer Journeys documents and you read the response that the Ministry of Transport made to the submissions and the consultation process that it undertook, one of the reports that was issued in March this year was about the further information called Further Information on the Proposal to Lower the Adult Drink Drive Limit to BAC, blood alcohol content, 0.05. And it goes through in here, sir, in this document, and backs up the Minister's personal opinion as to why that should happen. It makes the point that all the research exists already, and yet the Minister is refusing to act. And why is he refusing to act? Not because the arguments aren't strong enough. We've been able to disprove that week on week in this House, that there is an array of international research and New Zealand data used in that research that shows that there is an impairment for drivers between 0.05 and 0.08. That is beyond doubt. No government speaker today will get up and say they don't believe there is an impairment to drivers between that range. Indeed, I challenge them to. If they're so concerned that the research doesn't exist, let any of them go on the record in the House and say that a driver is just as safe at 0.08 as they are at 0.05, and I guarantee none of them will do it. In their hearts they know that is not right. But the Minister said that one of the reasons he was concerned about it was public support. He was so concerned that in a poll-driven way that there'd be public support for a lowering of the driving age. And I think it's one of the examples where Stephen Joyce advised his National Party political colleagues the wrong way. We know he is an expert on polling and focus groups and is a very principled man in terms of running on what focus groups and opinion polls think. It's how he makes many of his decisions. But he got this one clearly wrong. The One News Colmar Brunton poll showed that 67% of people wanted to see the blood alcohol content lowered. This bill doesn't do that. And Stephen Joyce, when those figures were confronted to him, because of course he'd said previously we need public support in order for this legislation to go through, his only response would be, well, it needs to be higher than 67%. He said it needed to be 75% on News Talk ZB before he would support a change in legislation in this respect. Putting aside the fact he's prepared to sit in the government that got 45% of the vote, that was fine to form a government on 45% of the vote. When it comes to moving to a change in policy in this respect, you need to have 75%. Which is a whole new argument that Stephen Joyce has put forward. So now the big, bold position in the bill is this. We're going to do 2 years of research. We're going to empower committees to decide whether or not this should happen, and we are going to unleash an army of analysts across the crash statistics of New Zealand drivers to see whether or not this should happen. This is the staunch leadership on road safety being demonstrated by members opposite. Members opposite who will get up and say that the Safer Journeys program is something that they're proud of. And yet what happened? When it came to a tough decision, they ran for the hills and they've appointed a committee to decide it for them. And in 2 years, beyond the next general election, that's when they're prepared to really show some leadership. So if it's an easy decision, they're in for a boots and all with a glossy document. If it's a tough decision, do an opinion poll, run a focus group, and if we're still not sure, kick it out for 2 years and let the analysts say what they think about it. Now, I hear my friend the Honourable Tohina on the other side of the House saying, "Oh, what did Labor do?" Well, I could spend the balance of my time talking about that because, of course, when Labor left office in 2008, we had the lowest road toll in 1959. 20 years after that member was born. 20 years after that member was born in 1959, we saw the lowest road toll ever. So, that just goes to show that we were taking measures on road safety. But park that up. Let me ask national members opposite this. Is it an argument to do nothing because 9 years of a Labor government did nothing? And 9 years of a national government before that did nothing? And 6 years of a Labor government before that did nothing? And 9 years of a national government before that did nothing? Are we really being told by members opposite that unless something's happened before, i.e. nothing happened yesterday, that's an excuse to do nothing tomorrow? When we're talking about road deaths in our country every single year, and we know that 1/3 of our road deaths are associated with drink and with drugs, and that's before we get into the issue of serious fatalities. And the only political argument members opposite can put up is, oh well, it didn't happen during the time of the Labor government. But hang on a minute. Two of the other measures in this bill, to raise the driving age to 16 and to have a zero blood alcohol content tolerance for drivers under 20, are in legislation sitting before select committees right now, introduced by the Labor government. So if it's all about what the previous government did, can members opposite tell me why they've included into this bill provisions that have already had a first reading in Parliament and are washed up at the Select Committee, one of them chaired by David Bennett. So, of course, surprise, surprise, it's stuck there for a while. Haven't been able to return to the floor of the House. So when it comes to the principle of road safety, we've got measures in the bill that aren't strong enough because the government lacks the political motivation to do it. And we've got measures that are being included in the bill that were started by the previous Labor government and which have been marooned off at a select committee in the last 2 years of this government. So let's not hear the arguments from national opposite that the only reason not to do this with respect to lowering the blood alcohol limit for adults is because the previous Labor government didn't do it. That cannot be their only answer. And if their only other argument is, oh, there's not enough research, there are 300 studies which clearly show the effect that alcohol has on drivers. And if members don't want to read the 300 reports, that's fair enough. They can just go to this short little report of 22 pages, which the Minister of Transport prepared for Stephen Joyce, which goes through and explains how in every state of Australia, remember the country we once upon a time wanted to catch up with, remember that country? Well, every state of Australia where they've lowered the blood alcohol limit to 0.05, there has been a drop in fatalities and a drop in serious crashes. And when you're talking about human beings and when you're talking about alcohol, it is impossible to imagine that the findings in Australia could be any different at all to New Zealand. These are just the flimsiest of arguments that the government is putting up in order not to act on these issues. Look, we support them on lowering the blood alcohol content to zero for young drivers. And I'd like to know, why is the government doing that when there's no New Zealand research on it? I mean, this is the argument. I mean, there is actually New Zealand research, of course, but in the same way that there is research for adults. But the government is saying, oh no, we won't move for adults because there's not enough research, but we're happy to move for young people. Now, we support them on that. I stress that. But they are using these arguments fast and loose, and these are political responses to matters that should be beyond politics. Road safety should not be a left-wing or a right-wing issue. It should be a parliamentary responsibility. And I feel very disappointed that Stephen Joyce was playing such a strong political game on this rather than working constructively across the House, because I believe if he put up a bill to lower the blood alcohol limit to 0.05, he would get nearly every single member of Parliament. He would get over 110 votes for that. I've got a bill up in my own name that I know has got the majority of support of members of this House. No, it's about the drivers in this country, Mr Bennett, and that's exactly who it's about, the drivers and the people of the country. And that member who's never spoken out against his own government once, he's never had the guts or the strength, he's never had the strength to get up and say, even though my government's saying this, I believe that. For reasons unknown, he